Joining us right now, best-selling author, former chief assistant U.S. attorney, and contributing editor at National Review. And you can also see him on Fox News. Andy McCarthy, our very good friend, who I've been just chomping at the bit to talk to. He's got a new piece looking at the Biden's statements about this and assessing, the kind of the similarities and the big differences between this and the Trump situation as well. And he joins us on the phone. Andy, as always, appreciate your time, my friend. The transparency, I don't really think there has been any. What's your reaction to that soundbite from Karine Jean-Pierre?
As a half-century observer of Joe Biden, I guess my position is that you'd have to have a grasp on reality in order to be able to convey it. So I think they get a pass on transparency because I've never detected any low these many decades.
Yeah, it's a good point with that. The timeline is incredibly suspicious to a lot of people because it seems as though, this has been, however many, 6 years since he's left office as vice president. And then we learned that this was all discovered even before the November election. Was there any kind of obligation or duty to inform before the election that all of this was happening, considering everything that's been going on with accusations of, whether or not elections are legitimate, et cetera?
I think there was for two reasons, Dan. I think there's a political obligation because they do purport to be transparent in all seriousness. And you would think, given all of the attention that's been given for, since August, certainly, about retaining classified information in an irresponsible way, that if Biden had been caught doing exactly that, they should have disclosed it. And the fact that they didn't do that just 6 days before the midterm elections goes to how much you can trust them. And then I think the other thing that's striking is Garland appoints a special counsel on November 18th for Trump. And frankly, there's no real good reason to appoint a special counsel for Trump because there's no reason the Biden Justice Department can't investigate Trump. The special counsel is relevant when there's a conflict of interest, which there would be if the Biden administration were investigating Biden, which the Justice Department's been doing for 2 years, but Garland has said that we don't need a special counsel on the Hunter case. So it seems to me that if he knew that Biden, the president, had mishandled classified information at the time that he appointed a special counsel for Trump for that very offense, that's something that he should have disclosed because it's something that would have gone into his calculation about why a special counsel was necessary.
And that special counsel, we're talking with our friend Andy McCarthy, Robert Hur, who's investigating the handling of this. What's your take on him? Because I don't really get into who appointed who or who's a holdover from who. I think that you can be fair within the law, regardless of maybe what your personal politics are. At least I hope anymore in this day and age we can be. But what's your take on Robert Hur?
Well, I always try to look at what the potential fault lines are. But my attitude about this stuff is everybody, unless there's a reason not to trust them, that's a matter of public record, that we should see how they perform before we start, casting aspersions at them. So with respect to the other special counsel, and I feel kind of the same way about, not special counsel, I'm sorry, with the other lawyer who's involved here, John Loesch, I feel the same way about Loesch as I do about Hur, which is, I think it was wrong and misleading for Garland to run around saying, look, I have a Trump-appointed federal prosecutor from Chicago looking at this, when everybody who knows how this works knows that a U.S. attorney, a district U.S. attorney, can't be appointed unless you get approval from the senators from the state that the district is in. And that's a blue state, Illinois, and Dick Durbin is one of the most powerful Democrats in the Senate. And by the way, Loesch was the only Trump-appointed U.S. attorney that they retained when they fired 55 other people when the Biden people came in, because Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, another Biden ally, went to bat for him. Now, I was careful to say, I'm not casting aspersions at Loesch, he could be the most ethical lawyer in the history of lawyers. But if they're going to say he's Trump appointed, I think everybody should know what the rest of the story is. And now, flash forward, to his credit, I think Loesch looked at this and said, look, there's two things that have to be determined here. Is there evidence to support a criminal investigation? Yes. Is there a profound conflict of interest in the Biden Justice Department investigating Biden? Yes. Therefore, I recommend that you have to have a special counsel. It's an easy call to describe, but it's not an easy call to make because of the politics. So he did a good job. And I think Garland's way too late on this. But he could have said no. Janet Reno said no. In 1998, on the campaign finance stuff in the Clinton years, Chuck LaBella, who was a lawyer from my office, I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York then, he was the John Loesch of that time. He was the guy who was brought in to say to Reno, you need a special counsel here. Back then, they were independent counsels. That's what they called them. And Reno wouldn't appoint him. And it was to her great discredit historically. So I think it's good that Garland decided not to be Reno in this instance.
There, we're talking with our friend Andy McCarthy, who has a great new piece about all of the batch of classified documents assessing Biden's statement in the first batch. You mentioned politics playing into this. There have been so many comparisons to the way that Biden has handled these documents, the way that Trump has handled his. And I know that one of the most obvious differences that people point out is, well, Trump was president, he could declassify, which I know is a process. It's not something that you can just snap into existence. But there do seem to be some factors that not only make Biden's worse, but I also think that the whole, trying to compare Trump and Biden with this is almost like a way that I feel like the left is trying to justify what Biden has done. Yet though he was VP and somehow got these. I mean, there's so many questions here. What do you make of this specious, differences thing, this back and forth that I see playing out on TV so often?
So I have a slightly different take on this. On the issue that you've raised, which is obviously everybody is comparing these two cases. I try to divide it into differences of kind and differences of degree. And in terms of differences of kind, there isn't one. They're both accused of mishandling classified documents. And from a prosecutor's standpoint, that's the bottom line because that's the crime. Now, in terms of differences of degree, in every single case where two people have committed a similar offense, there's differences in how they went about it. And you can make judgments about who's more culpable or who's not. But in the law, in the criminal law, we always say you're talking about sentencing issues, not liability issues. The liability issue is, did they commit the crime? And that's the judgment that has to be made. So, I don't really see them in terms of measuring degree. I think it's frankly too early to make a call on that because we don't know enough about Biden's offense yet. We've been sitting with Trump's for about for months. And we know a lot more about that one because of the involvement of the FBI and all the disclosure that's been made. So I just think the important thing is they've committed the same crime. To me, the comparison between Trump and Biden, while it's understandable that people would go to that, is not the right way to look at this. The right way to look at this is the context of these two transactions is that Hillary Clinton committed an egregious offense that's very similar to what we're talking about, and she got a complete pass. So to my mind, if you're the Justice Department and you're trying to make a case on Trump, you have a very small margin of error to try to establish to people that he is so uniquely awful that he should be prosecuted when she wasn't, after a willful violation that went on for years, and she destroyed tens of thousands of government files, knowing that there were investigations that they were relevant to. She probably gave false statements to the FBI in their perfunctory interview of her at the end. So if she doesn't get prosecuted, it's a really tough thing to say Trump should get prosecuted. So to my mind, they couldn't afford for anything to go wrong. And now what's happened is something that has gone wrong that nobody would have expected, which is that the sitting president of the United States is now under investigation for committing the same crime. So I don't see how they sustain the case, because I don't think they could have afforded a torpedo like this.
No, I don't think they could have either. Talking with Andy McCarthy, this because you said we're still learning so much about this, and I'm sure that the investigation into this from the special counsel, and I know Jim Jordan announced that there's going to be an investigation from the Judiciary Committee. That's their first one, apparently, that they're doing. If it comes out that everything that we've read thus far about where the documents were and how they were apparently so recklessly stored, particularly the Penn Biden Center, where there were reports that they perhaps were sharing office space with this CCP aligned entity. Do these sorts of, because I mean, if you're talking about the information was of a foreign policy nature from just early reports that we know, if all of this stuff, and I realize this is, I'm asking you to look in a crystal ball here, but does the presence of these other variables, like the CCP being involved and, Hunter Biden having access to this garage and apparently listing this as his address on his driver's license, does that increase or play in part the severity of any kind of penalty or charge? How does that weigh into this?
Well, I think it does, Dana, but I think the other thing is, because we've talked about the China Biden stuff now for a couple of years, right? So my question is, does this finally get us to at least back into what should have been the main focus of everybody's attention all along, which is the millions and millions of dollars that went into the Biden family coffers from people and entities connected to foreign regimes that are hostile to the United States and that are corrupt? That should have been the main, if this was the Trump family, and I know Trump makes everybody crazy, so take Trump out of it, but fill in the blank Republican. If this was a Republican family and the tables were turned that way, this would be the only thing we would be talking about, except probably whoever it was would have been impeached a year ago. So to my mind, maybe the thing that comes out of this is people are now focused on this Penn Biden Center, which came about after an astonishing amount of funding went into the University of Pennsylvania beginning around 2014, which was around the time that the Biden family's business ventures with the communist Chinese regime were really picking up steam. So I'm hoping that since nothing else has worked, maybe we'll now finally, put the focus where it belongs.
Yeah, that would be finally. It would take. What a Rube Goldberg way to get there, though. I mean, going through all of this just to get to that point. Last question for you, my friend. You mentioned impeachment, and I know that this is a long process, and there's still so many steps to go through. What's next? What can people who don't follow this process and know, what what can they expect to see? I mean, obviously, at the conclusion of the investigation, it's the special counsel that recommends whether or not Merrick Garland should file charges or not, and then it goes from there.
Yeah, a lot of this is illusory because there's really no such thing as an independent counsel in the American system, because all prosecution in our system is an executive function, and the Constitution reposes all executive power in the president. So no matter how they project the idea of detachment, the fact is this prosecutor reports to Garland and he exercises not his own power, but Biden's power. So ultimately, they answer to Biden. And I, you asked me what happens next. I think what happens typically is this now goes dark because everybody says, well, there's an investigation underway. I can't talk about it. And probably one of the worst things, I'm glad I hadn't heard this before. So I'm glad you said Jim Jordan is going to have his committee look at this, because when our system is working properly, the check on presidential excess is the Congress. It's not prosecutors who work for the president. So, I think you're going to hear the Democrats saying it's outrageous for Jordan to be interfering with the investigation. Of course, that was not an issue. When Trump was president, the Democrats were able to investigate whatever they wanted. And when, like, Steve Bannon was on trial, it didn't matter that his case was in a critical point. The January 6th committee wanted to have a primetime hearing, and why should they not have a hearing just because there's a legal case on, right? So the rules are entirely different with the press, sort of carrying their water for them. But it's Congress that's supposed to look into this, and it's all very interesting if Biden committed a crime or not. But the first question when a president is involved in felonious behavior used to be, is this an impeachable offense or not?
Right.
Which is not something that prosecutors get to decide.
This is going to be very interesting to watch. I think people need to revisit your last book, Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy Presidency. It seems like it's a good time for a reread. Andy McCarthy, always so good to talk with you, my friend. Happy New Year, and thanks so much for joining us. Have a fabulous weekend.
Thank you, Danny. You too.
Of course. Take care.